I don't. Welcome to I Do, Don't Do, Belong Here, the heart-to-heart about imposter syndrome. Ashley is here from Boston, UX and product design lead at Boston University, and spends most of her days investigating ways to make WordPress theme development, content management, and customization easier for both developers and end users at Boston University. She guides the addition of new features and functionality for the university's custom theme framework and regularly contributes to the design and front-end development of the university-wide user interfaces. She's a big believer in education, documentation, and her two pet bunnies, Millie and Peppermint Patty.
Hi, everyone. Morning. So this is I Don't Belong Here, a heart-to-heart about imposter syndrome. And normally this is where people would talk about themselves, but you're actually going to learn a lot about me just by hearing this presentation, probably more than you ever want to know, because I'll be using a lot of personal examples to talk about imposter syndrome and how it's affected me and how I think that we can possibly use some of those examples to make things better in the future. So today I'll be talking about what imposter syndrome looks like, how we end up with it, the factors that bring us to feel like imposters, and maybe what we can do about it in the future. So to begin with, I'm just going to define imposter syndrome because I was really surprised to find out as I was doing this talk and as I was explaining what I was talking about to people that nobody knew what it was. So it's easiest to sort of start with the Wikipedia definition. Thank you, Wikipedia. So Wikipedia says imposter syndrome is a concept describing high-achieving individuals who are marked by an inability to internalize their accomplishments and a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. That last bit, the exposed as a fraud, that's where you get the term imposter syndrome. You feel like you're an imposter, like you're a fraud, and somebody's going to find out, and you're just gonna be blown away, and someone's gonna do something about it. But although that's a defining characteristic of it, there's different ways that imposter syndrome can present itself. So I'd also like to go through a few of those just so you understand some of the examples I'm going to give a little bit better. So one of the first ways that you can experience imposter syndrome is knowing, despite overwhelming evidence otherwise, that you can't do it, that you've never really been able to do it, and that at any moment someone's going to realize that and do something about it. Again, that's closer to the official Wikipedia definition. That's the piece most people are familiar with. When you start a new job and you're absolutely sure that you were hired for all the wrong reasons and somebody's going to realize you're not skilled and you're not qualified and you're going to get fired. That's the first 2 years of new jobs for me, every single time, which is pretty miserable. The second sort of experience that you can have with imposter syndrome is this attributing any sign of success to forces outside of your control, factors outside of your control. So luck, affirmative action, deception, maybe you lied about something and tricked someone. That's sort of how you preserve imposter beliefs. Imposter syndrome lives and dies on you being able to say that I did a thing, but it wasn't because of me, right? it wasn't because of me at all, and that's why I can't repeat it, and that's why it will be a problem in the future. So what you do to make that happen is you say, it was luck, it was something about me, it was, something about the situation, but it wasn't me, and that's why it'll be a problem later. Finally, the final component of imposter syndrome, and the one that really hits close to home to me, is this fundamental questioning of not just your ability, but your identity, whether you even are who you say you are. So you may have all the skills, you may know that you can do something, and still have a very, very difficult time saying, okay, well, but am I really a designer? Do I really belong here? Or a developer, or whoever you may be. It hits people in academia, law, all sorts of places. So that's a bit about what imposter syndrome is. There are a few misconceptions I want to clear up about what imposter syndrome isn't. So if you've been following along and you're saying, that's me, oh perfect, this is great, there's something wrong with me, you can't, you don't get to say that, because imposter syndrome is not an actual diagnosable treatable disorder. It turns out that it doesn't meet the criteria for that. Imposter syndrome is a really bad name for it. A better name would be imposter experience or imposter feelings, because as it turns out, most people feel them. 70% of all people feel like an imposter at some point in their lives. So you can't just say that there's something wrong with me and kind of be like, oh darn, I'm an imposter. This is actually a very widespread problem, which is funny because most people don't know this, including me. I didn't realize it was this widespread, and part of why it works is because you think you're alone. I will also say that imposter syndrome isn't limited to women. If you do any sort of light Googling on imposter syndrome, you'll notice a lot of articles related to how it relates to gender and sex, and especially in tech, how it's holding women back. And that's all great. These are all valid points, but you don't have to be a woman to get imposter syndrome. And we know that from our 70% fact here, because 70% of us are not women. It's a very widespread experience. So who you are and your identity and the places you've been born into, the things that you deal with, all inform how you experience imposter syndrome, perhaps how much you experience it or how intensely you experience it, but it doesn't preclude you from having imposter syndrome to say, well, I'm a dude. I don't get that. That's not how it works. And actually, in subsequent studies, since this was originally discovered by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, who are the people who came up with the term imposter syndrome, they noticed it in women, and they theorized that it may be a reaction to women in the workplace, and this idea that maybe society viewed men as better workers, and maybe that's why this happened. Subsequent studies have shown that there is no gender or sex differences in your experience. Exactly, exactly. So now that we have a better idea of what imposter syndrome is and how we can relate to it and how people experience it, I'm going to talk a little bit about what my story with imposter syndrome is and some of the things that led me to feel the way that I feel. And for me, this starts by growing up. This actually starts very early. And it starts with the question, why do we have to be perfect? Part of what makes imposter syndrome work is this idea that you have to do things to a very, very high standard. It's this perfectionism and you not being able to achieve that. So my drive for perfection actually starts really, really early. This is 4-year-old me, clearly at my peak. I love with the sunglasses and Miss Piggy. This is me hanging out in the parking lot. And I look happy and things are pretty good in this picture. What you don't see in this picture is that I actually had a very tumultuous home life, that things were violent at home and difficult to deal with. And by the time this picture was taken, I knew what it was like to call the police. I knew what calling the police meant and what happened when you called the police. I had learned what it was like to be without a parent, albeit temporarily, and also to stay in places that I wasn't familiar with. So having experienced all this at this age, I had one goal and one goal only by the time I got to school, which was to look normal. I really just wanted to be a normal kid and keep my home life steady and not be broken up and apart from my family. And this is really easy when you're a little kid. All you have to do is you just look clean and you don't draw anything that might bring up suspicions, and you just kind of go about your daily life, and that's fine. So I kind of pretended to be this normal kid. I'd hang out with friends, the like. As I got to middle school, it got a little bit harder. I began to learn what different types of people were and the types of situations they might end up in. So one concept that I internalized was, what a troubled kid looks like. What does a troubled kid look like? And it might be violence at home and a lot of things that happen to apply to me. And, when you find a troubled kid things happen and you get split up and broken up from your family. So I said, okay, well, I don't want any of that. I want to protect my home life. What's in my control that I can do? And I said, okay, well, what troubled kids don't have? They don't have good grades, right? So I can do that. I can definitely get good grades. So my focus here was okay, I'm just gonna get good grades, keep my head down, keep going. But trying to hide this stuff is like holding 2 leaky pipes together with your hands. It just kind of leaks out and people notice anyway. So eventually it got really, really tough. I got to high school. I was supporting my family. My parents didn't have jobs anymore. Things were pretty rough. And I knew I didn't have a chance at college unless I got very, very good grades. Someone very kindly told me about grants and scholarships. And the thing with grants and scholarships is that they're very competitive. They're based on your family's ability to contribute. They're based on a lot of outside factors. And I said, okay, well, if I have any chance of getting at these and getting out and starting a better life where I can, be on my own and be in productive, healthy environments, I got to be like perfect, or I'm just going to fail. I'm going to be stuck here forever. And obviously it worked out. I'm here today. It's okay. It's fine. I made it. It was really great. But there was a high level of pressure and a high level of expectation that I had to put on myself in order to get there. And that's followed me long, long after. So a number of factors contribute to why you might experience imposter syndrome. They're sort of risk factors. And the first one is mine. It's to change a situation you were born into. So poverty, disadvantage, violence, turbulence, any sort of turbulent family situation is a big indicator, a risk factor of you developing these feelings later. A second sort of risk factor is if you are part of a group that's discriminated against. So you may grow up imposter to combat perceived impressions. One account of imposter syndrome from a Black kid that I was reading was that he was working and he was in school and his mom told him, you need to work twice as hard to be evaluated in the same way as your peers. People don't understand. They don't look at you the same way as other people. You need to work twice as hard to be the same level as everyone else. And that really stuck with me. That's never something I've had to experience, but you can imagine why that kind of pressure would lead you to feel these things later. There's an extreme cultural pressure to be self-sufficient. Part of imposter syndrome is that you are very internalized. You don't ask people for help. You don't, you want to hide the fact that you don't know everything, right? So you're not going to reach out and get help. And that begins when you graduate from high school or college and you're immediately thrown out into the world and and people are asking you, okay, well, did you get your job yet? Are you on your own yet? Oh, you're still living with your parents? And there's just this huge pressure to be self-sufficient immediately. So again, pressure is building, pressure is building, pressure is building. And as a side note, I will say I am of the millennial generation. People talk about millennials, and when people talk about millennials, they bring up things like participation trophies. And this is really interesting because it's usually in a really negative light, but none of us asked for this. And as a recipient of some of these, say, participation trophies, they were often for athletic events in my school, so you'd get like a finishing ribbon. And you'd be so ashamed of it. You'd be like, oh man, I do not deserve this. Like, yeah, like I finished, but nobody deserves a ribbon for trying. Like, give it to the people who actually deserve it. And what I wonder about this is if it builds an inherent distrust of praise, right? Because part of imposter syndrome is saying, well, you said this good thing about me, but I don't believe you for some reason. So what could be leading to that? Perhaps that, who knows? Still, although I felt all this great pressure and I was being the good kid, I was being this identity that wasn't me throughout my entire childhood. I grew up doing all this. Actual imposter feelings, the way imposter syndrome is defined, never hit me until I was in my career. I never felt this until I was actually working in a job. So that makes me wonder, when does doubt set in? Like, what is it that triggers these imposter feelings besides that high pressure situation? So you could say, okay, while I was a kid, I was in a high stakes situation, my future depended on me getting these grades. Why don't I feel like an imposter yet? Is it because I needed it in a job situation? Well, I went on and I got, one of those like, out of college, straight up whatever jobs as a housekeeper in a hotel. And I did all my rooms perfectly and I did things right. And it was a job and it was a high stakes situation because without that money, I am homeless. So that's great, but I never felt like I'm not a housekeeper, I don't belong there. So what is it? What changed? What's the external factor here that causes imposter feelings to develop? Well, one thing that I noticed was very different once I switched into an actual creative career, and I'm going to define creative here as any career where you're creating something. So that includes not only my field, design, and UX and things like that, but also development, because you are putting things together in a new way and problem solving. I would say to some extent, research and academia is creative because you're designing different sort of methods and scenarios to try and find a solution. The rules aren't easily defined in these careers. And that's sort of a different feedback system than we're used to, than what we grew up with. So what we have here is critique. If you guys have been through art school, this will look familiar to you. What happens is everybody pins up all their work, they gather around, and they discuss the merits and the detriments and things that could be better and things that maybe aren't working so well, all in sort of the goal of making work better, right? It's not like you're saying, okay, this and this and this and this and this for a grade. The ultimate goal is to push work farther and to make a better thing. It's not about you. This is a huge, huge leap from this feedback system. And so I heard a from over here. This is what I'm going to refer to as the red pen feedback system. This is the feedback system that you get for your entirety of, elementary school and middle school and high school. And it's not a discussion like critique is. The goal is to create better work, but it is directly tied to you and how well you do. So the number of red pen markings, the number of markings all over your paper is actually a direct reflection of your grade in school. But it's a reflection on you if you're put up to this pressure and you say, I need to succeed in order to move on with life. So that's a really big jump, right? Because when you're in critique like this, every single one of those pointings and, what about this and that and the discussion feels like these. And then you get out into your career and you're no longer even in a university environment. You're expected to perform and it's a job and you're reliant on it for your income and you're supposed to be independent. And you start feeling like this because every single day you are working and you're just trying to get it right. You're trying to put together something that will just be the right solution. And what happens is they say, oh, what about this? Oh, what about this? Oh, what about this? And with every change you make, every change that you don't realize is discussion, is open, and that you sort of internalize and you feel is a direct reflection on you, it feels like a failure. And what you say to yourself is, I can't get this right. Every single time I've tried hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, I can't get this right. I'm going to get fired any minute now. So this is the first year of your professional career. You get all this feedback, you get all of these things, and you make great work, but you feel like this. And it comes around to review time, and you're like, oh God, the review. And if you're like me, you're panicking, and you're like sitting at your desk, and you're like, and you get called in, and you're like on the verge of tears, and then this happens. Your job says great job, perfect review, awesome, you did fantastic. And you're like, wait, what, are you sure? No, I just spent the past year failing. What are you talking about? This is ridiculous. So there's this huge cognitive dissonance about how you feel in your first year of your career and what you get told, assuming you're completing your projects on time and you're, taking feedback into consideration, and what happens there. So basically, when we talk about the ideal environment for imposter feelings to develop, for you to feel like you're failing and something's going wrong, you have not only a high-stakes situation like a job or a career, but you also have an infrequent subjective, I'm going to put that in quotes just because a certain amount of this is subjective, feedback in a system that you don't yet understand, that you don't understand how each of these bits of feedback applies to you, that you're still internalizing it and saying, okay, this is a part of how I'm doing. That is where imposter syndrome develops. So by the time you get through a year of feeling like this, and then your boss comes along and says, no, actually, you're doing great, you're just fine, there's this huge, huge gap in how you feel and what's actually happening. And you have to make up for that gap somehow. You have to make that make sense. And there's no other way to make that make sense in your mind if you really feel like squirrel guy here on the left, panting and breathing, except to say that something outside of my control went wrong. In this case, maybe it's just because it's my first year. Maybe he didn't realize what was going on, or she. Maybe they're not looking closely enough, but next time they're going to look closer, and I'm definitely going to get fired. Which brings us to our second experience with imposter syndrome, blaming things on those external factors. So in college, I applied for a bunch of internships. This is my experience with external factors. And that was pretty great. I was like, okay, sure, internships, that's fine. They were all really high profile, and I was like, nobody's ever going to pick me. And then this is me in New York after they picked me. So that happened. And I was like, wait, why did this happen? When I got the call for this, I was very, very surprised because it was an internship with like 4,000 plus applicants. It's, like a big magazine internship. It's the kind of stuff you dream of, right? So it's like, no way I belong here. Poor kid from Michigan, what are you doing? So being the dolt I am, I asked. I was like, why'd you pick me? And the HR lady was very nice. She was very sweet. And she started with this sentence, and she said, we look for applicants from a wide variety of backgrounds, and sort of trailed off. And I'm sure whatever she said after that was really, really nice, but I didn't hear any of it, because what I heard from that was that it's not my work, it's not anything I did, it's just I'm poor from Michigan, and that's what worked, And the implication there is that no matter how hard I worked, the reason why I was picked was because I was an applicant from a different background. So that's an external factor, and that followed me long after. I wondered what else about me has boosted me to this position, that maybe I didn't deserve. It really introduces a lot of doubt. So again, imposter syndrome lives and dies by you discounting personal achievement. One way is just by saying, I just got lucky. So of those 4,000 people, luck of the draw, someone looked at me, and that was fine, but it really didn't have anything to do with me. They must have been desperate. This is a favorite of mine. I like to use this whenever somebody picks me for a conference to speak. It's really, really mean to the conference, so I'm very, very sorry, WPCampus, but it's my immediate first thought, like, oh, no way. Like, they must have needed somebody for this time slot. Of course, that's not the truth. This is, they care a lot about the people here, and all the speakers are amazing. So, that's definitely crazy, and I kind of think about that sometimes, and it's insane. They made a mistake. This one comes up a lot in admissions committees. So you'll get through admissions, and you'll be in your research program, and then you'll be surrounded by all these amazing brains, and they're super smart. And then you say, oh, no, you totally got it wrong. No way, definitely wrong. You made a mistake. And finally, it's only because I overprepared. I won't be able to keep this up next time. This is a coping mechanism. If you're experiencing imposter syndrome, what you'll do is you'll say, okay, well, I don't want to fail, so I'll do everything so I can't fail. And then you do everything so you can't fail, you succeed, and then you say, oh, no, I'm not going to be able to do that again. And it creates this weird feedback loop where you feel like you have to do everything way over-prepared in order to keep succeeding and to keep up that same basic standard of life that you have. So it's actually a really dangerous loop to get into. And those are all valid points. It's not like luck never plays a factor. It's not like things about you never play a factor. It's not like, maybe they did get really desperate and they slide me into this position. I have no idea. I don't really know the reasoning behind that. But what everyone fails to acknowledge when they feel these things is their part in the equation. You actually do have a very important part in making things happen, because without you, they don't happen. It sounds very obvious, but when you're experiencing these things, that's something that you just completely throw out the window. You say, oh, it's not me. It's not the truth. So I'm very, very lucky that all of those feelings for me are internalized, that there's no external verification of those things. That's not the case for everyone. So this is a book by Roxane Gay, Bad Feminist, which is excellent. I definitely recommend you guys read it. It's about her experience as a Black woman in America, and how media portrays Black women and things like that. But one of the essays that really struck out to me in this was her accounting of her first year of teaching at a university. And at this university, she is the only Black professor, and she feels imposter syndrome badly. Like, when she was talking about her accounting, I was like, yeah, that's exactly, like, I know how that feels. I know how it feels to feel like you can't be here and you shouldn't be here, and external factors are the only reason you're here. But where her experience differs is that she she talks about her sitting in her office, and she's sitting there and she's doing her work, and she begins to overhear faculty outside her door talking, and they're gossiping and doing their thing. And eventually one of them starts talking about her. And as the subject rolls around to her, somebody makes the remark, well, she's only here because she's Black. It's only because she's, she was a diversity pick. They needed someone for diversity. And that just stung. That was incredible. It was insane. So not only do you have people who have imposter syndrome and have these internal feelings, there's a whole subset of those people that get external feedback that says, yeah, absolutely right. All those things you think about yourself, true. And it's not. It's so not true. It's horrible. But it's a real factor, and it's something that those people have to deal with. It's horrible. So that just really stood out to me. And it starts to get into the third way that we experience imposter syndrome, which is this identity crisis, this feeling that we don't belong here. So for me, I'm not a developer. If you ask me if I'm a developer, I'll say I'm not. And to be clear, I'm not a developer. I'm not gonna say that, I'm not there yet. And if you try and ask me, I'll do this, I'll kind of go, nope, 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 and I'll run off and just avoid the subject altogether. I have nothing to do with this. And that's because I have a problem identifying with being a developer. It's because I don't feel smart enough to be a developer. And I feel like what I know is this tiny, tiny little subset, and what everybody knows is this giant, giant thing. And I just know a little bit of it, and they already know it, so that's great. Thanks. I had a couple bad runs with developers before getting into my last couple positions, very early on as I was starting to learn. And they were just, like the mean developer stereotype. They were the mean developer. I had one where I was like literally just in college, my first job, and it was just to update the website, and I could not get something right. And I knew it was dumb. It was something dumb like uploading a video correctly. And I was like, oh, I can't do this. And I was getting really frustrated. And finally I was like, okay, I got to reach out to this big scary developer guy who owns this and who owns the whole web thing and get help. And so I did that. And I talked to him, and he tried to explain it, and I wasn't getting it. And he tried to explain it, and I still wasn't getting it. And finally he came over, but he was very frustrated by this time. And I was very frustrated. And what came out of that was not great. It was not healthy. And he expressed his frustration. And that's fine. You can be frustrated. But what happened was I came out of that, crying in my car and thinking I'm too dumb to ever be in this arena. I don't belong here at all. There's no way I can ever do this. So to compensate, I tried to learn everything I could, and I felt like this anyway. Now, we all know the reality of this is that, we each know a little bit, and the rest is all Stack Overflow and Googling, right? So that's not true. And I know that now. I know that not everybody needs to know everything, and that there's a whole great big wide world of resources. And I might know something over here, and they know something over there, and that's fine. But I still can't call myself a developer. And when we think about why that might be the case, why you might not be able to identify with something, we start to talk about, okay, well, if I can't identify as a developer, what made me, why not? What is a developer? What is this identity? What's identity altogether? So we can come up with identity in a few different ways. One is positive reinforcement of identity. And I say this in B.F. Skinner terms, right? Positive reinforcement being, you have these characteristics or this thing is happening, you're more likely to have this result. So for this, I recently took up jogging, and I got this very relatable Reddit post here after joining a jogging subreddit, and it says, PSA, you're a runner. It's like, well, of course, is what most people would say, but I actually needed to be told this because I do not feel like a runner. To me, this is what runners look like, right? They're like sleek and great, and they're jogging along. This is what I see, the people I see running around, and they're just, doing great, and they jog 7 miles, and it's fantastic, and I'm huffing and puffing and panting and, sloppy, and my tongue hurts. That's not even a thing that you do when you run? Why? So it's really hard for me to identify with runners as a beginning runner because I'm not at this level yet. But due to things like media and advertising and the like, I have this sort of concept of identity of who a runner is. It doesn't match, so I actually need to be reminded that, yeah, okay, technically a runner, you're doing the running. On the opposite side of the spectrum is negative reinforcement of identity. So when I refer to negative reinforcement here, I say you have the characteristics of this, a bad result is more likely to happen, right? That's the more likely result. And so to demonstrate this, it comes up a lot in internet humor, in memes and things like that, just people joking around. What we have here is the older woman in the classroom. And this is actually, it's horrible. I hate to put it in here, but it's a good example of how it happens. So here we see, raise his hand and then as a mother. And that's the whole joke is, she raised her hand in a classroom and she shared her experience and that was that. And it's funny because she is different and she is sharing a different experience. And the subtext to that is, we don't want to hear that experience. No one cares. Stop derailing the lecture for the rest of us. If you look at what's actually happening in this picture, it's completely normal classroom behavior. She's raising her hand. She's reiterating the lesson in her own words and through her own lens, because that's the best way that you learn, right? You say, okay, this is the concept and this is how it applies to me. And she's doing that and she's just being a completely normal student. But she is punished because she has different experiences and a different skill set, and she's sharing them and being open enough to do that. So what this meme begins to say and what this culture begins to say is, if you are old, you are more likely to be the butt of the joke. If you are like this, you are more likely to be in this position. And it keeps people out, which means they don't get the representation to be in that larger group, the positive reinforcement, which tends to come up in advertising and media as like, oh yeah, these are the people that make up this group. And sometimes it's not so subtle. I throw this in because it relates to me. This is fake geek girl. She is passionate about something but is not the correct thing. So therefore she's fake and an imposter. I can't believe that actually exists, by the way. That's a real ad in a comic book. I could not have asked for a better demonstration of imposter syndrome here and what causes it. But this says, okay, you're not allowed to be a geek. You're not allowed to be a nerd because of these things you like. The kicker being, of course, that the definition of nerd is you're very, very passionate about something. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just something. And you obsess over it and things. So the fact that this girl likes LOL cats over here or runs a Blogspot page shouldn't be a problem. You'll also notice that none of these ever come up as guys. It's always girls. Anywho, that all may seem like a personal problem, right? Like, okay, well, what's this got to do with imposter syndrome? Except identity is like a big game of pickup sticks. It's very, very interconnected and complicated. And trying to pick out one identity and say, okay, well, I'm not a geek girl. I'm not this. I'm not allowed to be part of this. So that's fine. I'll just work on being a developer or a designer over here. Well, there's a lot of overlap between identities. So there are people around me that I see are developers, and they are also, big geeks and nerds. And if I'm not allowed to be a geek or a nerd over here, what does that mean about me as a developer? Am I a fake developer then? Like, am I still accepted there? And it gets really hairy and nitty-gritty and awful. And in fact, the more that you see environments where everybody is kind of the same, mostly the same, gender, sex, even the way people talk or their experiences, the way they do things, you're constantly reminded of, if you're different, how you're different and how you should be hiding it. But, only just enough, just so that you don't upset the whole game of pickup sticks. Oh, that's interesting. Why are you going that way? Okay. And we actually have a word for this, and it's called stereotype threat. So stereotype threat is this threat of confirming a negative stereotype which applies to your group in your current situation. So you'll say, for example, on this next slide, the stereotype here, if we're talking about mathematics, is men are better at math and logic than women, and therefore, if I'm a woman and I'm taking a mathematics test, I'm going to overcompensate, I'm going to work really hard, and that anxiety, that internal pressure that I'm putting on myself is actually going to affect how I perform on the test. So there was a study done on this, and with the stereotype threat, with just taking the mathematics test and the only language being we have a mathematics test. We're using it to determine, what drives mathematics ability, what, makes people better, some people better at math than others. With that threat, men and women performed equally. They both got 19% on the test. It was a very, very hard test, by the way, so don't think that's like a super low score. It was very, very difficult. Once you say that that test has no sex or gender differences, which is group 2, men and women actually start to get very different scores. So men stayed the same, they got 19%, but women actually jumped up to 30%. They got 11% higher scores on that math test just by being reassured that a characteristic about themselves wasn't going to hinder them on this test. And these are invisible things, but they affect us every single day. Again, not just women, but you can find this with just about any group, some sort of stereotype that will negatively affect you and how you perform in a certain situation. Which, brings us to, well, does all this matter? This is a whole lot of social problems and, this and that, and it's so big, but does it matter in the workplace? And the answer is yes, absolutely, it does matter. And that's because imposter syndrome holds us back. It really holds us back as a group. So if you are experiencing imposter syndrome, and let's say you are the older woman in the classroom, you don't feel comfortable sharing your experiences, you don't feel comfortable talking about things through your worldview, and you may see tons and tons of opportunities and ways to solve a problem from your point of view. If you can't share those, if you don't feel empowered to share those in your group, what you're saying is going to be much, much smaller. And that means that what we do is going to be the same over and over and over again. Basically, we never make progress. We never improve our code. We never think of things differently. We never build new things. Imposter syndrome just holds people back, and it holds ideas back. If you feel like this, if you feel like what you know is just a little subset of what everyone else knows, you don't go to conferences. You don't talk to people about what you know. Why would you? Everybody else already knows it already. It's a waste of time, right? So what this does is it actually prohibits teaching. It prevents the spread of ideas and people, teaching each other, even on a smaller level, taking on leadership responsibilities within your group. You're not going to mentor people below you if you feel like the person below you. If you feel like you have nothing to give, you'll never give it. And we know that's not the truth. Everybody does have something to give. So this is really a terrible thing, and we should do something about it. Finally, imposter syndrome just makes you feel terrible. If you don't care about the business reasons for dealing with imposter syndrome, you just feel awful. You go home and it follows you, and it makes you feel like trash. And it may make you feel like trash for a few months. For me, it's the first 2 years of every job. I will feel like this, awful, for that long. So the more we can do to get ahead of it quickly, the more we can keep people happy and just generally be good humans, because that would be nice to do as well. So that leads us to our final points. How do we fix this? And of course, the immediate answer is we can't, because it's a really, really big problem, but also imposter syndrome is a critical part of learning, right? Your recognition that you don't know stuff is what drives you to learn stuff. So we can't get rid of all of the discomfort. However, we can make it a little more comfortable for people to share their ideas and come out and be more open about learning instead of trying to internalize everything. And when I say we, I really mean we. This has to be a group effort. That individual problem that I mentioned, being an imposter lives and dies on you thinking no one else around you is an imposter and you trying to help yourself. But all of these factors are, not all of these factors, but many of these factors are external. So unless we all work to change them together, they're never going to change. So firstly, to the people in charge, managers, people working in conferences, things like that, you have a huge role. You can really affect change here. Fix anxiety around the system. You give clear performance goals separate from critique. You're going to want to do this right away, right? Right when you hire someone, talk about why they accepted the job, what you want to learn here, what are you trying to do, and what are your goals. Then set goals around that so that they don't get confused and think that the critique they get as they learn those things is part of whether or not they have achieved something. Be clear about your feedback critique system and what it means. This is kind of a, just an explanation of the above point. You want to make sure that people don't think that that feedback and critique is red pen direction. You want them to know that it's okay to get feedback and it's for the betterment of the work. Conduct that feedback and critique in the open. That prevents people from feeling like they only know a subset of everything, right? Because if you know what everybody else knows and you also see other people having trouble or other people who are improving, you're going to know that it's okay to do some of that and to do some failing and things like that. Finally, reduce the risk. Let people know it's okay to be wrong and make mistakes. This is huge. If you're in a position of hiring or picking speakers for a conference or something, you're in a unique position where you can control the environment your people work in, what they see every day. So hire for diversity. Hire not only people who look different, but people who behave different, are different ages, have different experiences. And that way we start to get that broader identity and we start to build it. The more that we build it from the ground up, the more that it'll be boosted up in those other places we can't control, like media and advertising. And finally, prove bad assumptions wrong. Give praise where praise is due with specific examples. That's really important. That goes back to fake praise. You want to make sure people know this is real praise. Be transparent about selection and awards. When I talked about speaker selection and how I thought, oh, it must be something else, I actually found out later for one conference that I applied to that it was a double-blind process, that it literally had nothing to do with me. Only my content was what got me there. And knowing that was amazing. It was like a huge weight had lifted off me. So if you have that kind of process, be transparent about how it's going. And then that way people will know exactly why they're being picked or not. Share your story, a mistake you've made, your first open source contribution, etc. That's a pretty obvious one. You want people to know what success looks like and what failure looks like as well. And then get a small list of safe, easy tasks together. Just get people started and build confidence. To friends and coworkers, you're a big part of this too. If your imposter friend says something like this, like if they start saying, oh, I didn't do really anything, it was all blah, 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 whatever, you're going to object to that, and you're going to say, no, you did stuff here too. You're not going to blame this all on external people and factors. You designed the entire thing, and Bob gave you like one file, okay? You're going to directly attack that and say, no, you're thinking about this the wrong way, preferably with lots of references so that I can't say, no, you're doing that. So, and also think about what you say and what it means. Simple advice, hard to do. The way that you talk and the way that you joke is a part of what's building identity and what's saying, what is and isn't, the correct behavior for a certain situation. So one super useful piece of advice is humor, just keep identity out of it. There's actually a lot of really good ways to do that. My favorite is, oh really? You can see these fabulous book covers, and they're hilarious because they're all things we do. It's a shared experience. But instead of tying it to a particular identity or a particular thing that someone might have that they can't change, it's just tied to frogs and dogs and, I mean, Jar Jar Binks. Sorry, Jar Jar. I guess that's not great, but the other guys are all right. And finally, to the imposters. Don't treat this like Fight Club. Talk about it. Tell your story. This is important because not only do you feel like you're alone, but other people do too. So if you tell your story, one, a bunch of other people are going to say, oh, I felt the exact same way as you. So you'll know you're not alone. But also you're going to help a lot of other people deal with their feelings and start to research it and get further along in their process so that they don't suffer as much either. Besides, there's a nice bonus to this. You have to admit you're smart. Because in order to have imposter syndrome, you actually have to be kind of good at stuff. You actually have to be a little intelligent. If you're not, what you have is the opposite side of the spectrum, the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is where you think you're really, really, really smart, but you're actually not that great at stuff. So there's that. That's a nice bonus. Get ready to feel a little awful. You're not always going to have good days. And in fact, there's a lot of situations that'll regularly trigger these feelings in you. You're going to feel this way when you're starting a new job. Like every time, you're just going to do it. That's what's going to happen. Getting a promotion, again, it's a new skill set. You've put yourself online. You're going to start feeling these things then. Learning something new, teaching people things, even though you know you're still learning. I get this one a lot. Working on something you really care about. This is the one that actually gets me the most these days, because I feel like I'm going to get this project and I want it to succeed so badly, and then I can't. You're going to feel this way then, or when you're the odd one out. So know that everyone feels like an imposter sometimes, and that's okay. Be ready for it, and then when it does hit you, don't let it stop you. Keep track of your accomplishments. That's a really, really easy way to say, no, you're actually making progress. Set reasonable goals in the short term. That's a pretty easy one, because if you have small goals, you can always feel like you're getting a little further. You can remember how far you've gone. And in fact, with long-term progress, if you look at me 5 years ago, I was in college. That's huge. I've made an enormous amount of progress since then. And I bet you have too in the past 5 years. Talk to a trusted friend. Imagine yourself being successful. I definitely have been trying to do that lately with this talk. Find a way to give back. That would be great for like conference presentations, or even working with people on your team, teaching people. It's a really good confidence booster. And stick it out, because you do eventually catch a break, I promise, even if it takes 2 entire years. And finally, you do you, because ultimately you are a person representing an identity, and you don't have to conform to whatever that's supposed to be. Do you, even if it's all about, you know, bunnies and hopping around and things like that. So that's it. And I managed to get this with only 2 minutes over, so that's amazing. I was way over earlier. Do you guys have any questions? It's really hard to fit imposter syndrome into 45 minutes. If you guys don't, that's okay. You can find me at Ashley Kolodziej, and if you want to help me out and WPCampus, there's actually a survey link with feedback on my talk, so I would love to hear your thoughts, no matter what they are. They can be good and bad. It's okay. I can take it. I'm strong today. Yes, I've got this. All right. Thank you guys so much.